So you're thinking about it, aren't you? About quitting in the middle of a pandemic? It's cool. Your secret's safe with me. But before you do, I want to talk to you about a few things. So let's get into it. Hi guys, welcome to my channel. I am Simone Keela, and here we talk about all things growth, from locks to leadership to love and everything in between. Today we are talking about quitting your job in the middle of a pandemic. You must be a little bit crazy if you're thinking about this, but I love just a little bit of crazy, so I'm here for it. I ended up leaving my job about 4 months before the pandemic really hit America. And so I often say, if I had known what was coming my way, I probably wouldn't have done it. But I'm so happy that I did not know, and I'm so happy that I did do it. And today is really just from a place where I'm talking from, it's a place of understanding that feeling of wanting to leave, understanding the feeling of wanting to be out on your own, understanding that like desire to not be tied down to a desk, all of that stuff, right? And also understanding what it's like on the other side of things, where it's unfamiliar territory, unfamiliar waters, if you will, that I'm swimming in right now. And I've been doing so for a little bit over a year, so I've learned some stuff. So that's where I'm coming from today. That's where my thoughts and all of that stuff are grounded in. The first thing to keep in mind before you check the deuces is it's gonna be lonely. Being out on your own, no matter if you're creative or you're entrepreneur, whatever your chosen fields is, if you're out on your own, there is a higher likelihood that there are less people that you're around, as far as the same people that you're around on a daily basis, at least in the beginning, who understand your struggles, who understand your highs and your lows. And unlike when you're in a typical job and you have coworkers who you can vent to about your boss, or coworkers who could talk trash about a customer that was like misbehaving, right? You don't have very much of that when you're out on your own. And you certainly don't have that when it's the pandemic and it just isn't those normal kind of like workspaces or coffee shops that you can go to with other like-minded individuals. So keep that in mind. It's not supposed to be a deterrent, but just like know that and know how and think about how you could kind of start to fill your cup if you're a person who needs to be filled up in that sense through other means. And so maybe it's a matter of making sure that you join some other community groups. Maybe it's a matter of putting time with your girlfriends on a monthly or bi-weekly or weekly basis on calendars. Whatever the case is, just make sure that you know that, hey, it's going to be lonely, and these are kind of my solutions to make sure that I still feel connected to people even when it gets lonely. The next thing to keep in mind that I definitely found was that it takes time to get things going. And the less kind of structures you have in place before you leave, the more time potentially it'll take to get things going. And this is not going to be everyone's story, but it certainly was mine. It took me time to figure out what I was charging people. It took me time to figure out how I balance paid work versus work that I'm not yet getting paid for. It took me time to be confident in the numbers that I was putting out there. It took time. And so the pandemic added this other layer to the time it took, right? Because the world was kind of like figuring out like how are we reacting, right? And I think that's still going to be the case for a lot of people, where things are shifting and our norms as a culture are shifting, right? And so alongside that, I think it's important to know thyself, period, right? I mean, this is whatever. I'm an Enneagram 7, I'll just say it. And it's one of those personality tests that you take, right? And I'm a person who deals relatively well with the unknown and unfamiliar. And so when I said that I had a shell of a plan, it still took a lot of guts for me to leave, but I was still relatively okay leaving, not knowing exactly all the different situations, all the different variables, like all the questions were not answered, and I was okay with that. If you check yourself and if you're honest with yourself and you're like, I couldn't do it, I need the answers. One, know that you're never gonna have all the answers, but two, think about what you could have in place as far as like guardrails, or how you can create padding for yourself, right? And so when it comes to financially, at least, right, if it's a pandemic, which is again this kind of added layer of things, maybe you're saving 1 year's worth of expenses versus 6 months. And if that's not possible, how could you make sure that you are leaning on your support system in different ways? Is there a way that you could bring somebody in as a roommate into your living arrangement, so you're spending less on rent? How do you start to think about either increasing your income, the money that you're bringing in before you quit, or decreasing your expenses? There has to be something that allows you to kind of start to get that padding, especially if you're a type of person where you're like, I need to make sure that I'm set and I'm not okay not knowing where my next paycheck is, right? So do things early on to make sure that you are like straight once you quit. The next thing is, as much as possible before you leave and you do have an idea, you should be thinking about how to pandemic proof your business, right? So a lot of things have gone virtual. A lot of in-person events now still are online, and that's definitely going to be changing back to like the norm in a little bit. But in the meantime, what can you be doing to make sure that you're thinking through the fact that there are people who are spending more time in front of a screen, the fact that there are a lot of people that still and will still be for a few months uncertain about really congregating in big groups in person. And so if you had this idea of an in-person event company, can you switch that? Not can you just, because it still work, but can you switch that so it's something that you're doing online, that you're allowing people to meet and congregate in some sort of virtual environment? I think it's also important when you think about knowing yourself to also ask yourself a couple of questions. Ask yourself if the thing that you're wanting to do, whether you can be doing it now as a side hustle. And be honest with yourself if you put enough effort into trying to see that thing through as a side hustle. Another thing to ask yourself is, will you regret not doing it? I believe in being moved by regret. I truly do. Like, we only have this one life to live, right? And if it's something that you can't, it's like that thought that churns and grinds in your head on a day-to-day basis, at some point you have to answer that. You have to figure out a way to answer that. Your desires, your gifts, your proclivities are not in vain. They're given to us for a reason. And it's our responsibility to manifest those things, or at least put in effort to see those things into fruition. It is our responsibility. And so if you would be plagued by regret by never taking that leap of faith, then you need to take it. Like that's what you need to do at some point. And it does not mean that you do it tomorrow. In fact, I believe in 2-week notices at the very least, right? But that does mean that you start to put structures in place so you can do it. And with that being said, to move into, why it is something that I would support for anybody, it's that one, now is such a great time to be a person who's working for themselves. One, there's so many people who right now, like even separate and apart from actually leaving your job, so many people who are willing to connect with people right now because they are traveling less and have more time to kind of like reach back and help another person out. And when you think about someone reaching out and helping you, know that that's not always going to come from someone that's ahead of you, but people who are in your networks. Some of my biggest supporters are my peer group. People who are like, yes, girlin', like people who I admire and I'm like, yo, you're so dope. Like, we're coming up together. So, don't just look for that person who is like on the stages and on the panels to be the person that's helping you right now. Also acknowledge the dopeness that you're surrounded by on a day-to-day basis. But with that being said, people are willing to help you. And there's such an abundance of information via the interwebs that you have at your fingertips, right? So if you want to start this business, if you want to do this creative thing, There are answers to your questions. There are platforms. There are Reddit forums. There are YouTube videos. There's ways to receive answers. And so what we can't do anymore is blame a lack of knowledge or information, or even honestly resources at some point. So the last thing that I want to remind folks is that there's no such thing as an ideal time to quit. None. And trust, I tried, right? Like I said, I had in my mind for a really long time, but like actively thinking about leaving for about a year and a half. And I pushed it off, because I was just waiting, like, all right, now second, oh man, this project's kicking off. Or man, like I kind of like my new team, like all of these reasons. And I know that people have those where you're like, oh no, I just had a baby, or oh no, I just got married, or I just got on a new team, or I'm up for a promotion, or I just got promoted. There's always, if you want to find an excuse, there will always be an excuse, right? Y'all, quick note here. I know that those are all very extreme situations, so obviously use your discretion. I was just making a point that you can always point to something as a reason not to do something else, quitting included. And so that's why when you think about this, really remember, and really, not even remember, find and dig into what your why is. What is your why for wanting to leave? And if that feels in alignment with you, if that feels good right here, in the depths of your soul, gut, whatever you want to call it, then go with that. But if you're doing it for any other reason but yourself, if you're doing it because you think it's sexy, don't do it because you think it's sexy. Don't do anything because you think it's sexy. People don't put the unsexy parts of their jobs, of their chosen paths on social media. So do not buy into anything because it's sexy, right? But figure out what your why is and move from that. And let the pandemic not serve as just another excuse in terms of why you're not going to do something, right? And if you want to flip it on its head and realize that with so many people who got furloughed, so many people who got laid off, so many people who have just straight up passed away, RIP to all of the hundreds of thousands that we've lost, that there are no guarantees in life. And so don't necessarily use the pandemic as another reason why not, but a reason as to why now. So that's it. That's what's in my mind in terms of all the things you should consider as you're thinking about leaving. Actually, I'm sure there's a million more, but this is just what's top of mind for me right now. I hope this was valuable to somebody. And if you found it helpful, please hit like or subscribe to the channel, share with the friends, and come back soon, guys. Be blessed.